Welcome to Mineral Talks Live, the monthly live mineral webinar that brings you in-depth and in-person interviews with mineral people from around the world. Mineral Talks Live is brought to you by a joint effort among the Mineralogical and Geological Museum at Harvard University, the Paris School of Mines, and Blue Cap Productions. Tune in on the first Wednesday of every month and stay connected to your mineral world. Now, broadcasting live from beautiful Honolulu, Hawaii, the land of aloha, ukuleles, and shakas, this is Mineral Talks Live. Hello to all our viewers out there, and welcome to our first post-Tucson episode of Mineral Talks Live, your favorite mineral talk show on the internet. For those of you who tuned in last month, you saw our first Mineral Talks Live shot with a live audience, and we hope you enjoyed that because we had an absolutely fantastic time. And we're thrilled to announce that broadcasting from the Tucson Fine Mineral Gallery conference room from now on is going to be a new tradition that we're going to do. And so we are inviting everybody to come down to the conference room when we're doing that to have our live show. Maybe we'll come up with some audience kind of participation games while we're doing the live show. Who knows? But make sure you come down in person for our February 2026 show live from the gallery. As for today's show, today is Wednesday, March 5th, and you're watching our 96th episode of Mineral Talks Live. I'm your host, Brian Swoboda, and together with the rest of our extraordinary team, Dr. Raquel Alonso Perez from the Mineralogical and Geological Museum at Harvard University, and Dr. Eloise Gaillou from the Mines Paris-Tech, aka the Paris School of Mines. We want to welcome you to our show. And speaking of our show, while I unfortunately may be the face of Mineral Talks Live, this show couldn't happen without my 100% equal partners, Raquel and Eloise. That makes Mineral Talks Live a majority female-owned project, and I think it's important to note that while also thanking you for your continued support. For those of you tuning in for the first time, Mineral Talks Live is a monthly mineral talk show that usually airs live on the first Wednesday of every month. Our goal on this show has always been to connect you with other members of the mineral collecting community via our interviews with some of the best curators, collectors, dealers, miners, researchers, artists, and media people in the mineral world. If you missed any of our past programs, you can always catch the rebroadcast on our Mineral Talks Live YouTube channel at www.youtube.com/@Mineral Talks Live. And when you visit our YouTube page, remember to click the subscribe button so you can be notified whenever we post a new episode. One of the other things that makes this program unique is not only is this a live show, but it's a show where you get to interact with our guests. To participate, all you have to do is type your comments in the chat or the Q&A features, both of which are located at the bottom of your Zoom window. The chat feature allows you to send messages instantly to everyone watching the live show, so we encourage you to be as active as you'd like in the chat during the show. And while our guests and I generally don't see your messages during our conversation, throughout the show, both Raquel and Eloise will be monitoring the chat areas and will be very active there. Occasionally, they may even interject a question or comment to us during the interview, so don't be shy if you want to ask something. Also, when you log in, we ask you to send a message to everyone, letting us know where you're tuning in from so we can see how far we're reaching around the world. If you happen to have a question directly for our guest, or maybe it's a bit more detailed or needs a bit of a longer answer, go ahead and use the Q&A feature and we'll get to those questions at the end of the show. Finally, towards the end of the program, you'll see a window pop up on your screen. This is our Quickfire 5 questions segment to see how well all of you know our guests. So test your knowledge, play along. Who knows? We may have a good icebreaker for you the next time you see our guest in person. And speaking of today's guest, I can't tell you how happy I am to welcome our guest to today's show. He's a bit of a riddle wrapped inside of a mystery, inside of an enigma. For example, where's he from? England? Maybe Germany? Lebanon? Oh, no. Maybe Ethiopia? No, wait, hang on. Bolivia? Or is it Spain? Or is it Tucson? Or maybe it's all of the above. And what is he? A researcher, a collector, a dealer, an author? Or again, all of the above. Whatever the correct answer is, it's unmistakable that he has been and continues to be a huge boon to the mineral collecting world, and is one of the nicest and most modest people around. It's my extreme pleasure to welcome Alfredo Petrov to today's show. Alfredo, how are you, my friend?
Hello, everybody. I'm fine. Thanks, Brian.
Terrific. Alfredo, tell us, where are you tuning in from today?
I'm in a tiny little town called Viladrau up in the mountains of Catalonia, the northeast corner of Spain.
And is that your primary residence, or you split time between there and Tucson, or wherever else you?
I work in Tucson for Rock Currier's old company, Jewel Tunnel. And so I'm there half the time, and I'm here in Spain half the time, which is where my family lives. So I go back and forth across the Atlantic every 6 weeks or so.
Wow, fantastic. Now, Alfredo, I always like to start my interview by turning back the clock. I usually start by asking about your first encounter with a mineral, but I'm going to go further back than that for you for my first question. Tell us about where you grew up and what life was like for you back then.
Well, I was born in England, although I have no British blood in me because my parents were sort of refugees from Eastern Europe at the end of the Second World War. So I grew up in England when I was a child, went to primary school there. My father was a farmer, so I lived on a farm. Um, and I started collecting rocks from the mud on the farm. My mother tells me, I don't remember this, of course, but my mineral collecting started very early because my mother says I used to bring muddy rocks into the house when I was 2 years old, and she was always throwing them out and I was dragging them back in again. So it started quite early. I have no memory of that, though.
And then, so where did you go after going to primary school in England?
Well, when I finished primary school, when I was 12 years old, my parents moved to Africa, to Ethiopia specifically. My father was involved in agricultural development projects there. It was still, it was still under the Emperor Haile Selassie's control at that time. Ah, yes, I see it on the screen now. This is my high school diploma. This is what I looked like when I was a teenager.
I have to say, you've got elements of Austin Powers showing up there.
So you can see it's written mostly in the language Amharic, which is a Semitic language, which was the language of the Ethiopian government at that time. They have 230 something, if I remember right, different letters in the alphabet. I used to speak this and read this 50 years ago, more than 50 years ago, but I've forgotten most of it now.
So, what was it like growing up in Ethiopia? I imagined you were like the one kid that kind of didn't fit in so well.
Right, I was the only white kid in my high school class. Everybody else was mostly Ethiopian and a couple people from Sudan or neighboring countries. The other kids were extremely friendly to me. I was dreadfully spoiled. They treated me like the class pet.
They'd feed you and groom you.
Yes, yes. Teenage girls liked to stroke my hair because it was so different from theirs. I mean, it was kind of the dream life for a teenage boy. I can't complain about it at all.
So, what cultural things did you encounter or incorporate into your life that you sort of still follow to this day? Because that's kind of unusual growing up there. I mean, you spent your from prime a little bit past primary school through high school there.
Right. So, well, in Ethiopia, I acquired a love of spicy food,
Mm.
which still lasts today. You know, English children don't get exposed to a lot of spices. At least maybe now things have changed. But when I was a child, British food was dreadfully boring. It has changed a lot thanks to the
Certainly.
influence from India and Pakistan and so on. But yes, I got a love of spicy food. I became a lover of all things multicultural. I began to appreciate, enjoying spending time with any other ethnic groups I could. I also was exposed to volcanoes, and had a fascination with volcanoes started, which still lasts today. I love volcanic minerals, especially from active volcanic fumaroles. I do a lot of collecting of those previously in Bolivia, now in Japan. So that interest has lasted all my life, and I acquired it in Ethiopia.
Fantastic. So, okay, so when you were 2 years old, you'd bring muddy rocks in from the farm, from the field, and your mom would throw them out. And then eventually you move to Ethiopia and you get exposed to volcanoes there. Where does your memory begin in terms of rocks or minerals playing an important fascination in your life?
It started in my last year in England, I think when I was 11 years old. I went into a used bookstore and I found Fred Poe's Field Guide to Minerals. And so I bought it with my meager pocket money and read it cover to cover. And that was the beginning of my fascination. And that was the British edition. I mean, maybe some of you know that Fred Poe published separate American and British editions of his field guide. So the one I found was the British one. And during my life since then, I've met several other people who told me that that was their first mineral book.
Interesting. So you're in the used bookstore, and there's something about that book that draws your attention. And this is before really being exposed to minerals. Unwrap that a little bit. What was it about that book that drew you to it?
Well, I still liked minerals. I was always bringing minerals into the house. At that time, I was living in a little town in England called Bracknell in Berkshire. The British had a big weather center there. But there was a clay pit used by a brick company. And in the clay, in the mud, you could dig out little pyrites and gypsum, um, fossils of some kinds. And so that was where me and some of my school chums used to go climbing around in the clay, getting all dirty. And we would find, especially the most beautiful thing there was probably these fishtail twins of clear selenite crystals embedded in the clay. And we would wash them off and take them home. So I was already collecting minerals in a sense, but I didn't know anything about the technical side of it until I found Fred Poe's book in the bookshop.
Gotcha. Okay, so you were already actively collecting things out of the clay pit, and then you found the book, and that kind of was the gatekeeper into this whole crazy world of minerals for you.
Yes, and of course, where I lived in England, we didn't get exposed to a very big variety of minerals in the young sediments of southern England. But luckily, very soon after I got this book, a few months later, was when the family moved to Ethiopia, and I was exposed to a much, much wider variety of minerals. And so the book came in handy for identifying things. And of course,
Okay.
Fred Poe had a lot of information in his book about chemical tests one could do, kitchen flame tests on minerals, which of course was quite exciting for a teenage boy. My mother was not quite so thrilled about it, but I was. And so, of course, I think that's very good. A lot of modern mineral books don't include that kind of information anymore, but
Right.
Fred Poe did. And so, since I had no other mentors or peers then who could teach me about minerals, identifying my own minerals chemically, thanks to Fred Poe's book, really became a very valuable.
Okay, so you are living in Ethiopia at this point. You've been exposed to a lot more minerals in real life just by being there. You've been exposed to volcanoes. Take us along the line of how you get from there eventually to Bolivia. And then we're going to talk about one of your lifelong mentors once you're in Bolivia, but fill in that gap there.
Well, I after I graduated from high school, I went to Beirut, Lebanon. Unfortunately, the MIM Museum did not exist yet. Otherwise, I would have surely gone to visit it. This is, before the Lebanese civil war started, and Beirut was a lovely city. My parents sent me to college there just because it was kind of the closest modern city to Ethiopia, so I could fly home for vacations and things.
Okay.
And in Beirut, education was available in English, French, or Arabic. You could pick the language you wanted to take your classes in. And so, of course, I picked English. That was the easiest for me. And I spent 1 year there. And then the revolution happened in Ethiopia, the communist revolution, where the emperor and his family were deposed. All the Western technocrats were expelled and replaced with Cubans and East Germans and people from the Eastern Bloc countries. And so my parents had to leave anyway. So after school in Lebanon, instead of going back to Ethiopia, I emigrated to the United States and I applied for a green card at the US Embassy. Back in those days, it was a lot easier to get than it is nowadays. So it was granted to me fairly quickly. And at 18 years old, I moved to the United States and started to study in California.
So is that where your parents moved to as well?
Yes, my parents moved to the United States too. The whole family emigrated to the US after we had to leave Ethiopia. They thought
Okay.
that the US was a better country for them than going back to England.
Sure, sure. And that was that San Diego?
Yes, that was San Diego. So my parents lived near Escondido, not very far away from San Diego. And I went to San Diego State. And because I was interested in traveling a lot and the Mexican border was very close by, I took Spanish classes. And unlike most of my classmates who only wanted to study Spanish just to get a grade for their GPA, I seriously wanted to learn the language fluently. So eventually I ended up moving across the border to Tijuana. San Diego was expensive, and I was fairly impoverished as a university student. So rents in Tijuana were only a third as much or a quarter as much as they were in San Diego. So I thought this would be a great chance to practice my Spanish and become more fluent. So I moved to Tijuana and crossed the border every day to go to class at San Diego State.
Oh, wow. So then that eventually somehow led to Bolivia. How did that evolve?
Well, after I graduated, I knew about Bolivian minerals. I knew that Bolivia had a lot of interesting minerals. I had read about them, I had obtained some, but I had never visited the country. And after graduation, basically the first long-term job I had a few short-term jobs in the United States, but the first long-term job I was offered was in Bolivia, and I just packed my bag and went without
Now, you
having
were studying geology at the time, correct?
geology and geomorphology. Yes.
Okay. And so tell us about your first impression of Bolivia when you show up there.
Well, I already knew what Latin American countries were like because I had been living in Mexico and traveled around Mexico for a couple of years and visited Guatemala, Salvador, Costa Rica, and so on. So I had a pretty good image of what Bolivia would be like before I got there. But I was expecting when I got to Bolivia to to be in the mountains surrounded by mines, and I ended up in the city of Santa Cruz in the Amazon basin where there were no mines. And everything was flat and green, and there were bananas and mango trees and no minerals. So the beginning of my stay in Bolivia was rather depressing. But then I ended up falling in love and getting married. That kind of happens to people who travel in Latin America a lot. And I had never been to the Cerro Rico in Potosi, where all the phosphophyllites come from.
Sure.
And I knew about them, of course, but had never been there. And the city of Potosi is the highest city in the world in elevation. Now, the Peruvians will dispute that and say they have a couple towns which are higher. And the Bolivians will respond, but those are not real cities because they don't have a university or a cathedral. And Potosi has both. So we're the highest city in the world. Your places are just dumps.
It's a village.
So I said to my fiance then, I said, let's take our honeymoon in Potosi. We'll start married life at the highest point in the world, and the rest will be downhill after that.
Oh, you're a true romantic.
So I got to go collecting minerals inside the mines of the Cerro Rico on my honeymoon.
Oh my God, you're starting to sound like Dave Wilbur.
And then I wasn't making much money then in Bolivia. Bolivia was a very poor country, and I wasn't working for a foreign corporation, so I wasn't getting an American salary. I was getting Bolivian wages.
Okay.
And then I heard about this job in Japan, at a university in Japan, where they were looking for somebody with a science background to correct research papers in several different sciences, not only geology. And they had a big problem with Japanese scientists writing research papers in English because they wanted to submit them to high-level international magazines like Nature or Science. And their papers were routinely rejected because even though the words were English, nobody could understand what on earth they meant. And
it hadn't been acculturated.
Yep. After the paper was rejected, they would take it over to an English professor in the English department who had spent his life studying Chaucer and Shakespeare.
Oh.
And he would mess it up even worse because.
Right. Now it sounded very highbrow, but still it didn't make sense.
Yeah, so they were looking for someone with a science background who had some idea how a research paper should be written. So I left geology for a while, moved to Japan for 4 years, and that was the job I had. And this was back in the 80s, the mid 80s. And back then, Japan, as you yourself mentioned earlier, Japan was going through an economic boom. Wages were very high. My wages were especially high. I was earning $70 an hour and was busy 7 days a week. And wow. I had no free time at all. After 4 years, it burned me out. But I never earned that much any years since. And back then in the 1980s, $70 was real money. It won't buy you very much anymore, but back then it was good. So I was happy in Japan for 4 years. I didn't have much chance to collect any Japanese minerals because I was working all the time. There was no time to do anything else. There was way too much work. Sometimes I would be woken up at midnight by some researcher desperately saying, and I'd be in my pajamas, and some researcher would say, please come downtown and meet me at a bar. I'm leaving at 7 o'clock in the morning to Florence for an international conference, and my presentation isn't ready yet. Come and help. And I'd have to get up, dress up, take a taxi downtown, spend all night in a bar with him, drinking beer and correcting his paper. This is in pre-computer days, so basically we were doing this with, red ballpoint pens and a bottle of aspirin, and that was my life for 4 years. And I got completely burned out. And at the end of that, I took my savings and I thought, let's move back to Bolivia and spend some time just relaxing and collecting minerals and not working. So that's how I ended up back in Bolivia again. But this time, instead of looking for a job, I was just a full-time gardener and mineral collector.
I love it. I'm going to pull up this old image and tell us about this. This is in Bolivia.
Well, this is a photo that was taken by Rock Currier, and that was in my third year in Bolivia. I ended up taking a job because I was asked to take this job. I was, well, you all know what an economic geologist is. I would describe my job as an anti-economic geologist because economic geologists are tasked with looking for valuable mineral deposits. But Bolivia was under some political pressure from the World Bank and other organizations to do more to protect its wildlife. So they were under political pressure to establish more national parks. And it was promised that if they established enough parks, some of Bolivia's horrendous debt would be erased. But they didn't want to establish national parks in places where there might be valuable minerals available. So I was hired to look for land that had no geological possibility whatsoever of having any valuable minerals on it. And that's what would be dedicated to make the next national park. So that was a really fun job for 1 year because I was with a team of other people, biologists, botanists, hydrologists, anthropologists, the group of a dozen of us, all with different disciplines, me hired as the geologist come mineralogist. We were sent out to explore basically unexplored areas in the cloud forests on the eastern side of the Andes.
That's exciting.
Yeah, we went to places where I'm sure no human had ever been before. Well, native tribesmen with bows and arrows, but not any city people had ever been there before. We sometimes had to use helicopters and things like that to get there. And we asked NASA for satellite photos of the areas we were studying. And in many cases, NASA told us, sorry, nothing available. This was permanently covered by clouds. We have no satellite photos.
Wow. Okay.
So we were in truly unknown areas. This is one of the areas that was somewhat known. There were trails to it. It took a week to get there. Trails maybe 80 kilometers through the jungle, and you had to go on foot. But this was an asbestos mining area in the late 30s and early 40s, completely overgrown with rainforest jungle now. This is the adits to one of the old asbestos mines. And I found a bunch of rare minerals in the immediate area. Doubly terminated danburite crystals. I found 900 of them and filled a shoebox.
No kidding.
This rare tourmaline called povondrite now. At the time, that one, yes, exactly. That's a photo that Jordi Fabre took of a specimen of it he got from me. That's one of the better specimens of it. It's a little miniature. Most of the time, this is just micromount size. But I was finding these rare minerals in the area around the old asbestos mine, and I filled a shoebox with 900 doubly terminated danburite crystals. And for the first time in my life, I had more minerals than I could absorb in my own collection or give away to my friends. And I didn't want to throw them away because they were too beautiful and interesting, I thought. But at the same time, I didn't know what to do with that many. And then coincidentally, another used bookshop experience, just like the one I had in England when I was 11 years old. I'm walking down a street in the city of Cochabamba, Bolivia, and there is a used bookshop with an old mineralogical record in the window. And I had no idea that there was a commercial side to the mineral business. I had never heard of mineral dealers or mineral shows. Mark you, I'm already in my 30s by this time, and I did not know that, been a mineral collector all my life, but I did not know that mineral dealers or mineral shows existed. You know, when I was a geology student at San Diego State, the San Diego Club had a big mineral show. You'd think they would come to the geology department at San Diego State, which is one of the largest ones in America, and hang up a flyer or something for their show. I would have gone to the show if I'd known it existed. Nope, nobody ever did. The geology department there was completely unaware that mineral club and mineral shows existed in their city. So I buy this mineralogical record and I'm leafing through it at home, and I see all these ads for mineral dealers. I did not know mineral dealers existed before. And I thought, wow, maybe some of these mineral dealers might be interested in my shoebox full of danbarite crystals. I can trade them for something else. And so I sent samples to 5 different dealers in Southern California. I just picked the Southern California one just basically randomly because that's where my mom lived.
Okay. Oh, sure. Yeah.
I picked all the ones who were, in the general area of where my mom lived because I thought I can visit them one day if I visit her. And the only one who really sent me a positive sounding response was Rock Currier. He wrote back to me, yes, there he is on his trip to Bolivia when he came to visit me. That, by the way, is the El Desierto sulfur mine. That is the mine owner's house. That is the mine, the El Desierto sulfur mine owner, standing between me and Rock Currier. And that's just some random miner on the right.
Okay.
But Rock wrote to me and he said, I get letters like yours from third world countries every week offering me specimens, and yours is the first one written in fluent English. He thought I was a Bolivian geologist and I was writing to him in remarkably fluent English. And he said, I take frequent buying trips to Bolivia not Bolivia, sorry. He said, I take frequent buying trips to South America, mainly Peru and Brazil. He said, would you mind if I stopped to visit you on my next trip? And I said, certainly. I'll come to the airport and pick you up. You can come sleep at my house. And of course, this is pre-email correspondence. This is back in the days when you wrote letters with a ballpoint pen on pieces of paper and mailed them from the post office. And so our correspondence took weeks to go back and forth. Mail from Bolivia was slow. But eventually we set up a date when I was going to the airport to pick him up. So I had never seen a photo of this man. And I had no idea what he looked like. And there he is, 6 feet 4 inches tall, weighing well over 300 pounds, and traveling with the 2 largest suitcases I had ever seen in my life. These were like the old steamer trunks people would take on cross ocean voyages. And so I went to Cochabamba Airport to pick him up in my VW Beetle.
I think we're going to need a bigger car.
Yes, he looked down at my pitiful car, me standing there in embarrassment, and he looked down at my car and he said, this will never do. He said, we're getting a Toyota Land Cruiser. And he went back into the airport and rented a Toyota Land Cruiser. And then he followed me home in the Land Cruiser.
I love it.
And when he got to my house and he saw all the rocks everywhere, there were rocks in the garden, rocks in the garage, rocks everywhere except the kitchen. My significant other didn't allow rocks in the kitchen, but everywhere else was full of rocks. And he said to me, Alfredo, you have too many rocks. I'm going to buy some of them from you, he said, but I can't buy all of them. So you should bring some to Tucson. And I said, what's Tucson? He said, the biggest mineral show in the world. Haven't you ever heard of it? I said, no, why would I have? And then he said, you have to come to Tucson. But after I looked at the logistics and the expense of hotels and airfare and renting a hotel room to sell out of, I said, no, this all seems much too expensive. And Rock said, well, okay. He said, you're coming as my guest. I'm paying for it. And that was how I ended up coming to Tucson for the first time in 93. And I loved the experience so much, I decided to quit being a geologist and become a mineral dealer. Being a mineral dealer in Tucson looked like much more fun.
I love it. Now, Alfredo, let's back up for a second for the viewers who are not familiar with who Rock Currier is. Describe to them who Rock is.
Rock came relatively late to minerals because he studied chemistry in college. He never graduated. He dropped out in his junior year of studying chemistry, and he got a job in the analytical laboratory at the big giant borax mine in Boron. Mm-hmm. And I may be mistaken, but I believe his boss at the mine was Jim Minette, who you
that makes sense.
Yes. And this was so Rock was already in his late 20s, I guess, at the time. He had never been exposed to minerals before, but the first minerals he was exposed to were white borates. And they were in a glass case in the manager's office, the manager of the chemistry lab. This was Rock's first exposure to mineral specimens, and he fell in love with them and started collecting borates. He didn't know any other minerals. He only knew borates. People started calling him the boron moron.
I've never heard that.
And when he decided to become a dealer, he somehow managed to wangle the subscriber list out of the mineralogical record and all the addresses. You know, we're thinking back very early 70s. And back then, you know, privacy regulations and things were not as strict as they are now. And he somehow managed to get the subscriber list, and he mimeographed a bunch of catalogs of borates, which he loved, and he thought everybody else in the world would love them too. And he mailed out the list to every subscriber of the Min record, his catalog. And then he sat by the phone for 2 weeks waiting for orders to pour in. And you'll never guess how many orders he got.
2.
No, worse than that, 0. Not a single one. At that point, most people would have given up the idea of being mineral dealers. But Rock went to his father, who was a famous surgeon. He had even operated on Babe Ruth, the famous baseball player.
No kidding.
In gratitude, Babe Ruth had given a signed baseball to young Rock, his surgeon's son, who was only 8 years old at the time. And Rock treasured that ball. That was auctioned for quite a high price among one of the auctions after Rock passed away. But anyway, Rock went to visit his father and sadly told him how his experience trying to be a mineral dealer had been an abject failure. And the father, who knew nothing about minerals, remembered that his college dormitory roommate when he was a medical student was from India, and he had a couple big pieces of colorful zeolites on his desk as paperweights. And Rock said, "The reason you failed in this is obviously because your minerals have no color. You need to contact my old medical school roommate and travel to India and see if he can get you some of those rocks he had on his desk." At that time, Indian zeolites were still unknown in the US. Right. When people thought of good quality zeolites, they thought of New Jersey.
Okay.
Those were the best ones known at the time, Paterson, New Jersey, and similar places. So Rock got the address of his father's old college roommate. His father lent him $1,000, which was enough money for a trip to India and things left over in the early 70s. His father told him, I expect you to pay me back. Go get some of those colorful minerals. So Rock went to India and came back with a container load of zeolites, which were quite a sensation at the time when they first arrived in Tucson.
Mm.
And nowadays, people kind of sniff at Indian zeolites and roll their eyes at them. It's like, well,
How quaint.
later in life, Rock used to say, everyone who wants an Indian zeolite already has 8.
But I've got 8 more that are better than the 8 you have.
Well, I mean, at the time, cabinet specimens of Indian zeolites were considered to be a great sensation, the kind of the mineralogical discovery of the century. Rock was taking them to places like the Freiburg Museum in East Germany and trading them for classic European Proustites. You know, nobody will give you a Proustite for an Indian zeolite anymore.
The good old days.
Yeah. So that was kind of the beginning of Rock's company, and it grew very rapidly. And he was a footloose bachelor with no family ties, so he started traveling all over the world looking for more mineral specimens and bringing things back to the States by the container load. So he started his wholesale company called Jewel Tunnel, which during Rock's lifetime only sold wholesale. You know, retail customers were not allowed into the room, basically, unless they were close friends. And he started selling it. He was selling in the wholesale section at Tucson when the club, the TGMS, still had a wholesale room. And sold at the Desert Inn, and then eventually moved to the Executive Inn when the Desert Inn collapsed. And his company became fairly well known. He was probably in the top 10 wholesale mineral companies in the world.
Yeah, and he used to always have a really big room over at the Inn Suites up until the very end.
Yes, the ballroom down there. Yeah. And he had a tent in Denver. He would have a large tent in the parking lot of Marty's Inn's show at the Holiday Inn, I think it was.
So you're in Bolivia with Rock. He decides he's going to buy a bunch of your minerals. Describe how the relationship evolves from there, because I think he became your first and greatest mentor.
He was my first mentor in minerals was a guy by the name of Russ McFall. He was an editor of one of the big Chicago newspapers, Tribune, I think. And he was a specialist in Keweenaw Peninsula minerals. And after he retired, he moved to San Diego and became the volunteer curator of the mineral department at the San Diego Natural History Museum. And when I was a student, and an impoverished student looking for a part-time job, I thought it would be fun to work with minerals. So I went to the Natural History Museum and asked the curator there, who was Russell McFall. The mineral McFallite from the Keweenaw Peninsula is named after him, a manganese mineral. But I asked him for a job, and he said, sorry, we have no jobs here for students. We're all volunteers here and don't get paid. But he said, I have a private job for you, if you like. He said, I have a German book at home on micromounts. He was a micromounter, and he wanted to write an English book about micromounting. That was his plan. It never came to fruition. But he had a book in German about microminerals written by a Swiss guy, Alex Kipfer. And he said, you come to my home and translate this book for me. And we would do it word for word. So we would read it orally. I would tell him what each sentence meant, and he would write it down in shorthand. Having a journalist, a newspaper editor background, he could write shorthand. And we did the whole book from beginning to end. It took several weekends over the course of a few months. And at the end of that experience, he paid me. I needed the money. And he also donated me my first binocular microscope. And he became my mentor in the study of rare microscopic minerals.
Okay.
There was never, ever any mention of the commercial side of the mineral business. I still did not know that that existed. Russ McFall never mentioned dealers to me or anything like that. So Rock was really my introduction to the mineral business. He was the one who converted me to being a mineral dealer, who taught me how to do it, who taught me how to go to sketchy countries and buy minerals in bulk from mining companies and miners. So that was all Rock's tutelage. And after a while, we became quite close friends because we ended up spending weeks at a time, sometimes a month or more, traveling to remote places, camping outdoors, sometimes living under very primitive, sketchy conditions, looking for remote mines to buy minerals from. So spending that much time together, we became close friends after a while. And I never worked for his company officially, but I would come to shows twice a year and work for him unofficially at Denver and Tucson. And the arrangement was that I would work for him and help him out at the show because he always needed more staff at shows. And in exchange, he would give me a table and free space to sell my own rocks at, and
Okay.
and also pay for my expenses, the hotels and restaurants. So I think that was a good deal that worked out well for both of us. But I didn't actually start working for his company, Jewel Tunnel, officially as an employee until after Rock passed away. And the Joseph Liepertz, who inherited the company or restarted it basically after Rock died, asked me to come and work for them.
Gotcha. Well, now, Rock introduced you into the world of mineral dealing, but you weren't the only one that he did that to. You've got a perspective on Rock that I think isn't really well known. And I think this might be a good time for you to kind of share that perspective on Rock and the Tucson show.
Yes, I think this is my opinion, and other people may dispute it, and my knowledge, of course, is limited. But I think Rock did more than any other individual to turn the Tucson show into the huge international event that it is today, with dealers coming from all over the world. Because when Rock first started going to Tucson with his Indian zeolites, there weren't really many foreign dealers at the show. It was an exclusively American event back then in the early 70s. There were a couple Mexicans came with their rocks across the border, and there might have been some Canadian snowbirds there who spent the winters out in the desert. But there weren't really people from Asia and Africa and Europe and so on showing up on a large scale. And there were American dealers running around the world buying stuff. You know, people like Martin Ehrman, for example. There were plenty of American dealers running around the world buying specimens and bringing them to Tucson, but they were not encouraging their foreign contacts to come to Tucson. They didn't want the competition, I suppose. Whereas Rock was very, very open about encouraging every foreign collector and dealer he met to come to Tucson, like he did with me. He said, Alfredo, you have too many rocks. You have to bring some to Tucson. And when I showed hesitation, he paid for it and invited me to come the first year so I could see what it was like. And he did that with or how would you say the right English word, selflessly, even though he was probably creating competition for himself and maybe making other American dealers upset. He was bringing people from Peru and Namibia and South Africa and India and Pakistan and Morocco and encouraging them all to bring their rocks to Tucson and helping organize it for them if they couldn't do it by themselves. And so I think he played, at least one can say he played a large role in making Tucson the international event it is today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. He was doing it for the greater good of the mineral collecting community.
Exactly. Variety was good.
Exactly. So now I think this is the most well-known photo of you. And if I'm not mistaken, Rock Currier actually took this photo. Is that right?
Yes, he did. He took that photo. We were on our way to the El Desierto sulfur mine, and to get there, there was no highway to go to the sulfur mine. We had to drive 100 kilometers across the hard, flat, salt, what do you call it in English? Salt flats, called a salar in Latin America. This is the largest salt flat in the world. It's about 100 kilometers wide. And there was a little island sticking out of the salt of this volcanic rock with cacti on it. You can see the big cacti there, just like Tucson. And there was an eagle living on the island. The ecosystem there was very simple. There were rabbits eating the cacti, and the eagle ate the rabbits. And I think eagles can't fly very far. He was pretty much stuck on that island. And tourists and visitors had kind of thrown meat out for him. This eagle had kind of lost his fear of human beings. And he decided that looking for a high place to perch on, he landed on my hat. I think his claws would have been quite painful if I had not been wearing a hat. But he was quite friendly, and he stayed for several minutes, and he sat on Rock's shoulder for a while too. Rock very carefully lifted his hand up and tickled him under the wing, and the eagle seemed to like that. And after about 5 minutes, it flew away. But that was my one close experience with wild eagles in my life. A lot of people tell me, "Oh, Alfredo, you've got a vulture on your head or a buzzard or something." No, it is a real, genuine eagle. It's called, the Latin name is Harpy haliatus solitarius, in case any of you are bird watchers.
Superb. Now,
you see the cacti, people think cacti need hot weather like in Tucson. In the Salar de Uyuni, the temperature drops well below freezing every night of the year, even in summer. And in the winter, it can drop to minus 20 degrees centigrade. These are Arctic temperatures.
Wow. Wow. So
the cacti do just fine.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
The cacti do just fine.
Sure, sure. Now, Alfredo, you spent a lot of time traveling throughout Bolivia with Rock. I've heard rumors about a shower story having to do with Rock. Is that something you can share with us on the show?
Oh, yes. When Rock got back, that was actually in my house. When Rock got back, after I got back from Japan with all my savings from 4 years of working in Japan, I bought a quite nice house on a lake shore in Bolivia. But the shower was quite primitive. Bolivian showers, there are no hot water tanks in Bolivia. So you have only cold water going to the shower. And inside the shower head, you have a naked tungsten heating element, and they run at around 4,000 watts, 220 volts, double the voltage in the United States. And you have to be very careful when you take a shower there, because when the water first starts running out of the shower head, it comes out in a continuous stream, and then gravity stretches it, and it stretches out into broken drops. You have to make sure when you're taking a shower that the top of your head is in the zone of broken drops. You absolutely do not want your wet head to get into the zone of the continuous water stream, because then you will be zapped with a 220-volt shock. And of course, the shower head was not tall enough for Rock. So he had to take a shower with bent knees. I explained to him that the top of his head must never be in the zone of continuous water stream. Well, I'm sure that a heavy man like Rock trying to take a shower with bent knees must have been extremely painful. And at some moment he forgot and stood up straight. his brain was zapped with a 220-volt shock, and he was knocked out. So try to imagine a picture of a naked Rock Currier covered with soap, sitting on the cold ceramic tiles of my shower. And when he woke up and tried to remember what he was doing there, he named my shower the death switch. And after he got back to the United States, he wrote an article for the Mineralogical Record about his trip to Bolivia. And the title of the article was The Bolivian Death Switch. And I forgot what year it appeared. And many people who read the Mineralogical Record, if they haven't read the article, they would have a hard time imagining, what the hell does the Bolivian death switch means? Well, it's the name of my shower. How many people have their showers named in the title of a MinRec article? Oh,
I'm sorry.
I remember his article started out, and I don't usually remember article sentences word for word, but I remember every painful word of the first sentence of his Death Switch article. He said, Alfredo Petrov picked me up at the airport in a car, which added a whole new dimension to the meaning of the word dilapidated.
Oh,
yeah, how many people have had their cars described in the MinRec?
Their cars and their showers. I think you're unique. Oh my God. I'm sorry. Hey, so Alfredo, speaking of Rock was a huge supporter of MinDat. And you are obviously very active on both MinDat and the Friends of Mineralogy forum that Jordi Fabre started. Now, we've had both Jolie and Ralph, who started MinDat, and Jordi Fabre on our show. But since then, we haven't really talked much about those forums. So why don't you tell the audience a little bit about your involvement in both of those? And at the same time, I'm going to ask Raquel or Eloise to go ahead and launch the poll.
Well, yes, I've been involved with MinDat ever since Jolion first started it. And that was back in the year 2000, I believe, early 2000. So MinDat is going to be 25 years old soon.
Wow.
I believe that MinDat will be planning some sort of 25th anniversary celebration at Tucson next year, so stay tuned for whatever that is going to be. But when Jolion first put MinDat online, because MinDat first started out not online, but as Jolion's private way of cataloging his own collection. And later on, he thought it would be useful for collectors to put it out there for the public and put it online. And so he did that in early 2000, I believe it was, 25 years ago almost. And he put out a call for volunteers to help moderate it and upload data. And one of the first mineralogists to respond to him was this Belgian guy. After his name escapes me, I'm having a senior
moment.
Somebody else will remember, but a Belgian guy who was a professional mineralogist and had a mineral named after him. Anyway, he responded rather negatively that he didn't think this project was going to go anywhere. And there were about 6 people who responded positively to Jolion's call and offered to help upload data and moderate the site. So I was one of the original 6 members of the management group. So yes, I've been involved with MinDat right from the beginning. And I don't think Jolion really expected that his project was going to grow into the big institution that it is today. but I'm sure the majority of collectors and dealers and curators will all agree that it's kind of become essential to our lives over the last quarter century.
100%. Now, regarding the FMF that Jordy started, how is that different from MinDat, and where do they kind of cross over?
Well, a lot of the FMF has a smaller user base than MinDat. There is an English, but it tends to be people who are very dedicated to mineralogy, and on the English side, to more fine mineral specimens. So the emphasis on the English side of FMF is more the discussion of fine mineral specimens, and not so much the type of thing you see on other mineral sites where, I found this piece of gravel in my garden. Is it a diamond? And stuff like that. The FMF tends to try to limit themselves on the English side to more what they call fine minerals there. And then there is also a Spanish side. So it's bilingual. There is an English side and a Spanish side with a little bit of crossover. There are some of the Spanish side people also participate on the English side. The Spanish side has a lot of discussion of the mineralogy of Spain and Spanish localities. And they collaborate very closely with MinDat because the FMF Spanish side group kind of controls data quality control for Spain on MinDat. And it's really a pity that Spain has a dedicated group like that and most other countries don't. Because basically, before any information is added to MinDat, the Spanish FMF side holds a discussion about it, and they will not upload the information or change the information until a consensus is reached and everybody agrees that this is accurate. And there have always been people who have criticized MinDat and said, well, this kind of wiki-style database where anybody is allowed to upload information. How can you guarantee accuracy? Well, the accuracy level can be a bit spotty depending which part of the world you're talking about. But at least for Spain, we can hold Spain up of an example of where it's very well done, that there is this dedicated group of people, which is the Spanish-speaking side of the FMF forum, which has kind of taken control of making sure that the data quality is as it should be.
So that data quality is just data on minerals related to Spain, is that correct?
They basically only control the Spanish mineral localities. Now,
Okay.
a lot of the members on that forum, like Jordy himself, Jordy specializes in collecting minerals from Spain, France, and Morocco. And Jordy is extremely knowledgeable about the minerals of France and the minerals of Morocco too. And he has done a lot of data quality control on MinDat for Moroccan minerals, since there don't seem to be any native Moroccans interested in doing that. So the Spanish forum does concern itself with some of the neighboring countries too, but it's principally Spain.
Okay. And so I know it would be nice if the rest of the mineral community kind of stepped up a little bit and followed that example that Spain is setting. What are the areas in the world that are least like Spain in terms of the information that's being provided by the local community?
Yeah, well, because MinDat is entirely run by volunteers, the data upload side of it anyway, and you can't really force volunteers who aren't being paid to do anything. So everybody works on the topic which is of most interest to them. So for me, for example, the two countries which I'm most knowledgeable about and most interested in are Bolivia and Japan, which both luckily are very mineral-rich countries. And so I mostly deal with data quality control and upload of new data and controlling the accuracy of photos, for example, that people upload, identification accuracy of photos, locality accuracy. I deal with principally with those two countries, Bolivia and Japan. And as a side, also to some extent, other countries like Argentina. But there are some countries which don't have anybody interested in them, and so they're very poorly done. You know, all the countries which don't really have a collector base.
Mm-hmm.
There are countries which have very interesting geology, but nobody knows about the minerals there because there are no collectors and no dealers. I mean, think about places like Paraguay, Suriname, Ecuador, multiple different countries in Africa, Cambodia, Philippines. There are dozens of countries in the world for which the information on MinDat is very spotty and somewhat vague. And that's mainly due to the fact that dealers don't go there and there isn't a local collector community. So basically, the only stuff on MinDat is whatever was uploaded from scientific references that happen to have been done there. So there are places on MinDat that are quite well done, including China, for example, thanks to begin with to Berthold Ottens. But there's lots of third world countries which are very poorly done. And there are US states which are done very well and US states which are done very poorly. California is a bit of an inexplicable mess, and that's partly because there's a very big collector community there, but not many of them seem to be interested in uploading data. And I've approached some collectors and asked, can you upload data on the localities you're familiar with? And the attitude seems to be, oh my God, no, I don't want thousands of other collectors going to my favorite spot.
Okay. Well, there's the challenge, California. Step up.
And I've heard the same thing from British Columbia. British Columbia is rather spottily covered in MinDat. And I think it's the same reason. A lot of British Columbia collectors just fear that their favorite localities will be overrun if they are too well covered in MinDat.
Sure. Understood. Now, Alfredo, I heard a rumor that FMF, which has been the hosting fees have been entirely funded out of Jordi Fabre's pocket, and now he has retired from mineral dealing. So I heard a rumor that the MIM Museum in Beirut is stepping up and taking over that. Can you confirm that or give me more details on that?
I can confirm that that is correct. It has been, Jordi has mentioned on the public forum on the FMF, so it isn't a secret. He has mentioned that the MIM Museum has agreed to support the FMF forum. Exactly what the nature of this support is still vague. We are waiting for further news, but it's good to know that now that Jordi is getting elderly and is slowly retiring from the mineral world, that there is somebody else willing to step in and pick up the ball.
That's terrific. So thank you, Salim, if you're out there watching this. Alfredo, we are over an hour on our time, so we should end the show, but I think it would be a disservice if we didn't talk quickly about your experiences in Japan. And I know that influenced you greatly, and it continues to influence you. So let's move the timeline over to your time in Japan.
Well, my first period in Japan, when I was working there as a research paper editor, as I mentioned, I really didn't have any time for mineral collecting. Mm-hmm. But now, in my semi-retirement and mineral dealing phase, I do go collecting in Japan. I go field collecting a couple times a year in Japan, and I've spent a lot of time principally visiting little-known localities or completely unknown localities that Japanese collectors don't go to. I don't want to reinvent the wheel. I like going to places that no one else has ever been to before. So that is what I'm currently spend my free time doing, is field collecting and looking for previously unknown localities.
Now, I know we had talked about collecting in fumaroles in Japan, and tell us about this locality.
Okay, this locality is called Aogashima. Those cliffs are up to 400 meters high, so that's well over 1,000 feet high. So it's an island that has people living on it, but it's very hard to get to because it's surrounded by these many hundreds of feet tall steep cliffs all the way around. It looks like there are people living inside the crater, but those buildings, nobody is allowed to live inside the crater. So those buildings there are actually mechanics workshops, farmers' greenhouses, and things like that. There is a village with over 100 people in the upper right part of the picture outside the crater on that bit of flat land at like 2 o'clock on the picture.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's where you land by helicopter to get there. And this is currently, right now, my favorite mineral collecting island. No one had ever been mineral collecting before. I Googled for information on minerals there. There was absolutely nothing. MinDat had absolutely nothing from there, no mention. I asked my Japanese field collector friends, and none of them had ever been there. So I thought, this is where I want to go, just to see what there is. And we kind of turned up some extremely interesting things, including the best volborthites ever found in Japan so far, and several other rare minerals. This is me inside the crater at a steaming. This is kaolinite clay, which is at a boiling temperature. So there's always steam rising from the clay bed. And a little guest house on the island for the small number of visitors they get. And the guest house lady said, "What time do you want to come back from lunch?" And I said, "We can't come back for lunch." I was with 2 collecting companions from Germany. Said, "We can't come back for lunch because it's too far to hike to come back just for lunch." So she said, "Okay, in that case, I'll give you a lunch sack to take with you." And she gave each of us a brown paper bag. And inside the brown paper bag was a raw fish, a raw potato, a raw sweet potato, and an egg. So I looked inside the bag and I thought, what on earth are we going to do with this? And she said, "Well, you find one of the steam beds inside the crater, you make a hole with a stick, you put your paper bag in, you cover it over, and you plant the stick there so you remember how to find your food again, otherwise you'll lose it." And she said, "Come back 45 minutes later and your lunch will be cooked." And it was absolutely perfect. The perfect way to cook lunch inside a volcano.
Amazing. Amazing. Tell us about this shot right here.
This is me with Michel Meder, a German prospector who came with me on this trip. Another person who came was MinDat manager, Dr. Amir Akavan from Hamburg. And this was our first sign that there might be interesting minerals on the island, because this was a basalt or andesite block that had fallen down from one of those steep cliffs on the coast. And it was covered with a diverse assortment of little copper minerals. And this is the yellowish mineral is volborthite, and the dark green stuff behind it is atacamite. And when my friends first saw me hammering and chiseling on this, they said, "Why are you taking that? It's just lichens." I said, "I don't think they are lichens. I think they are minerals." No, that's just lichens, I was told. But anyway, yes, they did turn out to be minerals. And it turned out to be actually the best volborthites ever found in Japan to that date. The previous volborthite finds there had just been very micro.
I love it. I love it. And here you are in your Darth Vader phase.
Yes, this is on a different island called Iwo Jima, or Iwo Jima, as it's often written on by Westerners. This is not the Iwo Jima. This is the real Iwo Jima. It's not the Iwo Jima of the Second World War movie, because the Iwo Jima name on the island of the Second World War movie is actually a cartographical mistake made by a US Navy cartographer. He misread the kanji characters for that island as Iwo Jima, and on American names, that name stuck. But actually, that island's name is Iwo To, not Iwo Jima. And this picture here shows the real Iwo Jima, which is Iwo Jima just means sulfur island. And yes, there's sulfur on both of those islands, but it has caused some cartographic confusion. But on my way to the fumaroles here, I'm wearing a MinDat t-shirt, which was actually destroyed and became full of holes because the steam coming out is not pure water steam. It's sulfuric acid steam, which is the reason why I'm wearing the gas mask, so as not to destroy my lungs. But an unforeseen consequence of it is it destroys all your clothes.
Totally. And so here you are, you've upgraded the VW Bug a little bit.
So this is also on Iwo Jima. There used to be a mine operating on the outside of the crater at the top of the mountain. And the mining machinery, the fumarole activity grew so bad, there was so many sulfuric acid fumes coming out of the ground that the mine had to be abandoned and all the equipment was left behind. And after 20 years in the sulfuric acid gases, this bulldozer was entirely changed into a big mass of limonite. There is no iron left in it. It's just crumbly iron oxides. If you were to hit this bulldozer with a hammer, it would fall apart. So I call this the world's largest pseudomorph. It's a pseudomorph of goethite after bulldozer. And yes, and people are surprised when I point out, because nobody thinks of this, that the bulldozer is actually heavier than it was before it became a pseudomorph because of all the weight of the oxygen that has been added to it.
Interesting. Now, Alfredo, I'm not quite sure what I'm looking at here, so go ahead and describe this one.
This is my poor snapshot of a northite feldspar crystal from another active volcanic island in Japan called Miyakejima. And what you're looking at is an inclusion of native brass. Native brass is an extremely rare, usually very microscopic mineral. And here the strip of native brass inside the feldspar is about 4 millimeters long, so easily visible to the naked eye. And this is the kind of thing I love to keep in my own personal collection. It won't win any beauty prizes, but I like things which are extremely rare and fine examples of very rare species. And so this is in a thumbnail box. It's a thumbnail size anorthite crystal with this big inclusion of native brass inside.
Now, that is fantastic. Now, Alfredo, people know that I don't collect minerals and I obviously don't deal minerals. I think the one time I actually have purchased a mineral from a mineral dealer has been you. And these were the pieces that I bought. Go ahead and tell our audience what we're looking at here.
Oh, these are called cherry blossom stones, and they weather out of a hornfels. So the hornfels has turned into clay. The hornfels is a rock which is a kind of natural ceramic. It's clay-rich shale which has been cooked by a granite intrusion coming up underneath it. And within 100 or 200 meters of the granite in this locality in Japan, you find what the Japanese call cherry blossom stones. And I think they are unique to Japan. And it's kind of an interesting cultural coincidence that Japan, the one country in the world where cherry blossoms are almost worshipped, happens to be the only country which has a mineral which looks like cherry blossoms.
I love it. And I bought these actually for one of my kids' class. I was doing a mineralogical presentation, and I made little passports, and I gave them this as a mineral from Japan. So I believe this is you and John Rakovan actually collecting these pieces.
Yes, the man in the foreground, if I remember rightly, his name is Mr. Okamoto, a very dedicated Japanese knowledgeable field collector. And there's me and John Rakovan in the back. And we went to see the locality where these cherry blossom stones are found. And it's a very tiny area. It's only about 10 or 20 meters wide. And you basically can pick them loose out of this weathered hornfels clay. This is the kind of mineral collecting you do with chopsticks instead of a hammer.
Right on. I love it. I love it. All right, we're coming to the end here. This is kind of how people more normally associate you. Where is this? Is this in Tucson?
This is in Tucson. And some of you who've been going to Tucson for many, many years will remember this as the Mexican restaurant called La Fuente. And now it is the headquarters of Jewel Tunnel, the company that Rock Currier started that we talked about before. Jewel Tunnel moved from the Los Angeles area to Tucson. We took over this restaurant when it was abandoned. We remodeled it inside, and we've kept the old decor. Those are the old Mexican paintings inside on the wall. Here I'm holding Rock Currier's collection catalog. Rock kept a very detailed catalog listing where he got each of the minerals in his collection. So that's with me now. The microscope is Rock's old Wild microscope, which he used to have on his desk. So I came to work for Jewel Tunnel part-time after Rock passed away, and we kind of continue his work on a smaller scale than what he did it at.
I love it. Now, this next photo has a really interesting story behind it. You were telling me it before we went live. This is a mineral from the Tucson area.
Yes, this is a giant fulgurite, which was found in Marana. And we have been trying to put it's broken up. Fulgurites are usually broken into pieces because of all the little steam explosions that happen inside them during the milliseconds when the lightning is active. So fulgurites are formed in mere milliseconds when a powerful lightning strike hits sand and melts it. And the sand in the center of the fulgurite actually boils. So the temperature reaches like 3,000 degrees centigrade. The silica inside the fulgurite, it's not only boiling, it is not only melting, it's actually boiling. And that tends to explode and break the fulgurite into pieces. We've put a few of the pieces back together here so you can see how large it is. There are actually many more. There's kind of sand on the outside and it's stuck to green glass on the inside. And this was found recently in Marana on the outskirts of Tucson. Here you see some of the greenish glass on the inside. The green glass is actually the mineral lechatellierite, which is the same mineral that composes moldavites and Libyan desert glass. And here we have a big cabinet museum-sized specimen of it, really, from the Tucson area. Many of you have been going to Tucson every year for decades, but how often do you ever see a mineral from Tucson at the Tucson show? I never have before this one.
That's great. I love it. And then finally, this was previous to today. This was your 15 minutes of fame.
Yes, my 10 minutes of fame, I'd say. This was I made the cover of the online edition of the New Yorker. They had a reporter out there reporting on the Tucson show, and this was their lead photo, which I think was quite inappropriate because a person looking through a microscope is not really what goes on most of the time at the Tucson show. But anyway, here I was for my 2 minutes of fame on the New Yorker.
I absolutely love it. Alfredo, we could go on and on. I want to ask you about El Dragon Post Office, the Japanese police station, but we are like almost at an hour and a half over in the show, and we still have to do the Quickfire 5 and the Q&As. So I'm going to jump to the Quickfire 5. We'll do the Q&As, and maybe afterwards, if we still have time, you can tell us those stories. So this is the way this thing works. I've got 5 questions. Each question has 2 answers. All of your answers are correct. We have presented these questions to the viewing audience, and they have tried to predict how you will answer. And so I'm going to read you the question and the 2 answers, and you tell me which answer you resonate with strongest. Okay?
Okay.
All right, here we go. Question number 1. Favorite place to collect minerals, Bolivia or Spain?
Bolivia.
Bolivia. Question number 2, and we apologize to the viewers because I think on number 2, we put both the answers were the same. So all of you, you're going to get it correct, but I want to hear from you, Alfredo, what your answer is. Favorite rare thing, a rare mineral or a rare inclusion?
Oh, that's too close. I can't say. Give everybody a point.
Okay, so both answers are going to be correct, even though everyone was presented with one answer. Okay. Question number 3. This is a tough one. Okay, you might have to really think about this. Favorite rock, igneous or Currier?
Oh, well, they're very different things. Let me avoid the issue by saying, since Rock is no longer with us, I'll go with the igneous alternative.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Question number 4. Favorite mineral size, micro mount or cabinet?
Micro, definitely.
Micro. And question number 5. This is perhaps the toughest question. Favorite thing to bring on a trip, to me, like the luggage, or roomy?
Roomy.
All right, Raquel, Eloise, who's going to go through the answers with me today?
I can do them.
Okay.
I can do the Q&A.
Terrific. So question number 1, favorite place to collect minerals, Bolivia or Spain? Alfredo went with Bolivia. What did our viewers say?
93% Bolivia.
Woo-hoo, right on. Question number 2, we all know the answer. Everyone got it correctly, and it was too close to call for that one.
Yeah, but Brian, you usually don't let our guest to just pass by without choosing, and you let
Really?
Alfredo go.
So are we going to hold his feet to the fire?
That's all right. That's all right.
Okay, then I'll pick rare inclusions.
Rare inclusions. There we go. All viewers got it correct.
The feldspar.
Yeah, I think we had rare minerals as both the answers, correct?
No, we have red inclusion.
Okay.
Yeah.
So everyone got it correct anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, number 3, favorite rock, igneous or Currier? Alfredo with the politically correct answer of igneous, since Currier is no longer with us. What did our viewers say?
They were very politically correct, so they went with Currier.
Wow, I like that. I like that very much. Favorite mineral size, micro mount or cabinet? With no hesitation, Alfredo went with micro mount. What did our viewers say?
Micromount.
Micromount. Oh, and the final and perhaps toughest question: favorite thing to bring on a trip, to me or rumi? Alfredo predictably went with Rumi. What did our viewers say?
I think our viewers know Alfredo. They went with Rumi.
Oh my God, that is the first time in a long time. 5 out of 5.
Yeah.
That is great. Congratulations, viewers.
Now, for the ones that don't know, Alfredo, will you tell us why will you bring Rumi on a trip? Tell us about Rumi.
Rumi is my 10-year-old daughter, and she's my assistant in hunting for crystals. And sometimes she does a better job than me in finding stuff.
Wow.
She has better eyes, no doubt.
And they're closer to the ground.
Yes, indeed. All right, let's go through the Q&As. How many Q&As do we have, ladies?
Raquel, did you go through the chat? Because I have only a few questions in the Q&A. I have Elizabeth Triano asking, well, not asking, but commenting. She was still waiting to hear about the notorious connection with the ugly minerals.
Oh, the black
What is
uglies
the
from
connection
Bolivia?
there? The ugly minerals. What's the connection there?
Well, I do like beautiful minerals like everybody else does, but I also like ugly minerals if they are rare. My philosophy on minerals is that minerals are like children. The ugly ones need love too.
Oh, I love it. Yes.
Okay, that works. That works. Another question by Michael Sanders. When did Alfredo return to Bolivia? What time frame is this? So that was earlier in the conversation.
What was the question? Sorry, I didn't understand.
I'm sorry. Like my internet question connection is bad. Maybe Raquel, if you want to go ahead.
Yes, is when do you go back to Bolivia after Japan?
I actually have not been back to Bolivia since the pandemic started. I really do need to go at some point. I have a lot of rocks still in Bolivia, and part of my collection is still there, but I have not physically been there since the beginning of the pandemic.
The question was, after you did your translation job in Japan, you returned to Bolivia just for pleasure. When was that?
Oh, at the end of 89.
Okay.
And then I spent 3 years in Bolivia just collecting minerals until 93 when I met Rock Currier and he turned me into a dealer. That was in 1993.
Okay. And then the next question, which I can answer because I live in Spain. So people, Alfredo, they are wondering about if you have a phone, a wall phone with a cord behind you on the wall.
No, that is a phone, but it only goes to the speaker outside the door. So when people ring the bell, I can talk to them before I let them in. But it's an intercom to the front door, not a wall phone.
Very good. We have one more question, and I think it was clarified on the chat, and it was about the cherry blossoms. If they were, I'm going back, and then twin Andalusite, and then someone mentioned Barbara mentioned they were cordierite, and you and John Rakovan did some study on the.
Yes, John Rakovan has written an article on these interesting stones in great detail in Rocks and Minerals magazine. I don't remember which year it was, but I'm sure you can Google it. Rocks and Minerals published John's article on how these things formed. The center of the flower was an indiolite crystal, which is a very rare high-temperature version of high-temperature polymorph of cordierite. So the center was indiolite. The petals on the outside were cordierite that kind of grew epitaxically around it. And then both of them, the indiolite and the cordierite, have been mostly replaced by muscovite mica now.
Very neat indeed. So I think that's all for today. Brian, we are 2 hours and 30 minutes. I need to go.
2 hours. We're 1 hour and 30 minutes.
Yes.
I can do 2 hours and 30 minutes.
Yes, it's 1 hour. It's 2:30. Apologies. But Alfredo, before I go, everyone has so many stories that wants you to tell, and everyone is complimenting how good storyteller you are. So thank you so much for doing this for us today. It was a true treat.
Well, thank you very much
so
for inviting me. It was a pleasure to be with you all.
Alfredo, I loved having you on the show. Like I said, I could do another hour with you without even breaking a sweat. That would be easy.
We have a comment saying just write a book. You have so many good stories.
Well, some of the chapters will have to be written after all people with concern have passed away.
Indeed. All right. Well, Alfredo, thank you for joining us on the show. This has been episode 96 on our march to episode 100 of Mineral Talks Live. All you viewers out there, thank you for tuning in. Tune in again next month for another exciting adventure with your favorite Mineral Talk show online, Mineral Talks Live. Take care. Have a great month.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.